Prynawn da, good afternoon. I'm Natalie, I'm the director here at Lead Full Action, and I'm really thrilled today to be joining you for Learning at Work Week to talk about one of my favourite topics, how we can learn smarter, not harder. And in this session, we're going to share some real life tools and techniques and tips on how we can take the masses of learning that is out there, because there is so much learning out there now. We've got access to so much information, so many different ways to learn, how we can take all of that and really make it work for us in our day-to-day lives. So hopefully we'll get plenty of opportunity to share some ideas and to share some of those techniques that will help you along the way. If you've got any questions, if you've got any comments, please pop them into the chat and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Okay, let's move forward. So a little bit about us. So we're a small boutique learning provider, which really focuses on how we can support people to be at their absolute best. And we're all about impact. Our main goal in what we do is to work in partnership with our learners and with organisations to help people to realise their potential, both at a team level, an individual level and an organisational level. And everything is all about how we build capacity, build capability, build those leadership skills at every single level across an organisation. We work with some fantastic partners and clients across Wales and beyond. And we're really, really proud of the work that we do with all of our very innovative, forward-thinking clients, a handful of which are on the screen there now. But what are we here for today? So I'm going to talk about 3 key things so that hopefully we'll be able to send you away with some really useful, really impactful learning and information and how to implement that in your day-to-day life. So we're going to talk about how learning is a process. And when we learn, it's more effective when we do our learning over time. Learning should not be a one and done event. We're also going to talk about how small, consistent learning habits can help us more than just trying to fit in an awful lot of information in a very short space of time. When we build on our learning, when we add to our learning, that is when the magic happens. And then we're also going to talk about how we can learn better when we're actively engaged. I think that's a no-brainer for a lot of us, but quite often we try to engage in learning in a way that is very passive, reading, coming along, to a session and just trying to take it in, when actually we know that the best way to learn is to actively engage and involve ourselves in that learning. Okay, so let's think about a recent learning experience that you have had. It could be a formal learning experience. Maybe you have learned something in your workplace, you've been on a training course, maybe you have done a webinar, done an e-learning package. Think about that learning experience. And I just want you to reflect on, how did you learn in that learning experience? I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that. What were the methods that you used to go through that learning experience? You might be saying some of the following. You might be thinking, I went to a workshop. I undertook a qualification. Maybe I watched a YouTube video. I know if I want to do anything DIY based in the house, YouTube is my go-to. There are other streaming platforms available, but I'll go to YouTube first and have a look and see how complicated it is before I start. Maybe there's a manual in your workplace of how to do really common tasks. Perhaps you watched someone else, you shadowed them and saw what they were doing. Perhaps you just had a go. Maybe you did more than one. Maybe you started with a workshop and then you went away and looked at the handouts that you had and reread the handouts, and then you had a go. My next question really is, how much of it stuck? So how much of it did you retain post-learning? Do you think you came away and remembered all of the main messaging? Maybe you left with some of the key points. Maybe you remembered 1 or 2 things. Funny video, or something that you talked about in a group discussion. Maybe you didn't remember anything at all. Maybe you came away from that thinking, well, that was a nice way to spend a couple of hours. Or maybe that was a nice book that I read. But actually, it hasn't really stuck. And I wonder what the correlation is between how you learnt and how much of it stuck. And not from a point of view of learning styles, because whilst we can recognize that there are things that we enjoy doing, there are ways of learning that we enjoy and we get a satisfaction from, there is no universal evidence that we can only learn through one or two different styles. You know, the whole idea of learning styles and how I'm a activist learner or I'm a kinesthetic learner. That's more about preferences of enjoyment and preferences of how you are in the moment, more so than whether it actually helps you to learn. And that actually we know that a variety of ways of learning is important if we want that information to stick. So I wonder how much of a correlation there was for you between whether you only had one way of learning and whether you had multiple ways of learning, and how often you revisited the learning as to how much of it actually stuck. And I'd like to give you a moment to reflect on that. Think about the correlation between how you learnt and how much you retained. And as I already mentioned, we know all of the neuroscience points to the fact that learning is not a one and done event, and nor should it be. The days of believing I can go on a training course, or I can go on a webinar, or I can do a qualification, I can read a book, and all of a sudden I have downloaded all of this knowledge that will help me to do the thing that I need to do, is false. Actually, learning is an ongoing process. It's something we have to engage and re-engage in if we want it to stick. Now, that doesn't mean we have to go on 50 training courses. There's this recognition that actually there are many, many ways to learn. And that is the whole concept of Learning at Work Week this year. There are many ways to learn, not just a training, not just a book, not just an e-module, not just shadowing. There are multiple ways that we can learn and take on information in a way that helps us to retain and, most importantly, apply it. And that is a really important factor. It's not whether we just hear it and understand it. Yes, that's important. It's can we transfer it into our day-to-day life? There's no point in watching a YouTube video on how to fix your washing machine if it doesn't help you to fix your washing machine. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use the multiple methodology of learning to help us to embed learning and to, really importantly, transfer and apply that learning. So let's take a common, hopefully a common understood scenario. I want you to imagine that you have to buy and put together a new piece of flat pack furniture. Could be a bookcase, could be a new desk, could be a table. I'm going to use the term bookcase for now because we've all probably put together a bookcase in our times. I've put together many. So I want you to think about putting together a new bookcase from Flatpak. And I'd like you to think about what methodologies you would use in order to learn how to and apply how to building that bookcase. So just take a few moments to jot that down. What different ways would you learn and apply putting that bookcase together? Just take a moment to do that. So let's break it down. We all might go to one particular way first, but I would imagine we all use multiple methodologies. Now, there's a running joke in my household. My husband will open up the flat pack, get the instructions, read them back to front, maybe read them a second time, lay everything out nicely, check he's got everything, and then maybe read the instructions again. I will open the flat pack and start trying to put things together. So we've all got different ways that we might start our learning process, but hopefully they will, across the span of putting that bookcase together, you will engage in multiple ways of putting your bookcase together. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So we might start with thinking about what we are trying to achieve. Well, you've already done that piece before you've even brought the bookcase home, because actually you've seen the picture on the website or you've been in the shop and seen a built bookcase in front of you, and it's given you a mental picture of what you need to achieve. You've got your end result in mind. So before we've even begun, we're already learning about what we're trying to get to. We're learning about that end goal and that end result. And that imprints in our minds what success looks like. And maybe it's also about thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve. If you've bought a bookcase, it's probably because you've got books that need a home. So thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve will help you to also understand what it is you are trying to achieve. It's no good building a bookcase if you cannot put your books on that bookcase. Okay, the next thing we might do is read the instructions. As I said earlier, some will go straight to this, some will avoid this at all costs, but at some point we will probably have to read the instructions. We will have to look at what goes with what and how we construct it all together, what type of screws go in this place or that place. So at some point we're going to need to look at what are the steps that we need to take. Then we might also subconsciously be aligning this with our understanding and prior experience. Perhaps you have bought bookcases from the same shop before, and we know that they always go together in a very similar way. We know that usually we have to use tacks on the back of the bookcase to create the back of it. We might know that it uses this particular type of screw mechanism. So we're going to start, as we're reading the instructions and starting to put all the pieces together, we're going to be aligning it with our own understanding and prior experience, what we know about the situation, what we've done before, where we've gone wrong and where we've gone right, and linking that and aligning all of that with the instructions and the end result that we're looking for. Next, we might need to find out a bit more information. Perhaps we get a little bit stuck and the instructions are not quite what they should be. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but sometimes I look at instructions and I think I don't even understand what that bit is. They don't put any wording in there. It's just a picture. Is that upside down? Is that the top? Is that the bottom? So then I might go to YouTube or somewhere else and I might watch a video, or I might ask someone else, have a look at this. Do you think this is the way it goes? Is this the right way round? Will you sort of help me figure this out? So I might try to find out a little bit more information to help me to overcome any barriers or to help make sure I reach success as best I can. Then I might do a bit of trial and error. Perhaps I think, oh, that looks like it goes by there. I'm going to pop that in there. I'm going to tap that in there and see how that goes. See what that looks like. It gives me the opportunity to see things in real time, to see what's working and what isn't. Perhaps I might make a mistake. Perhaps I might put the top part as a shelf in the middle and I'll realize part way through and I might have to go back a little bit, but I'll know better next time. The next time I try to build a bookcase, I will double check that the top is in the right position. And then I might also assess my progress as I go and adjust as I do that. As I start to see things clicking into place, I might think, oh, well, actually, I know a quicker way of doing that. The next time I put a shelf in, I know this is how it works. And so it'll be quicker, more effective, more efficient. Just in that very short, very simple example, we can already see that there are 6, maybe more different ways that I have learned how to build a bookcase. More than just the instructions, more than just give it a go. There's social learning, there's reading, there's listening, there's having a go, there's talking to someone else, there's observing, there's getting feedback both from a person or from the situation itself, there's aligning with my current understanding. So many different ways to build that bookcase. Doesn't mean the next time I build that bookcase I'll be an expert, but it does mean I will be a little bit more accomplished when the time comes. So let's talk about those many ways to learn and what they look like. So I've split them down into 3 key areas, and I think it's all about building, retrieving, and applying. So as I talk about these, I'd like you to think about what they mean for you in the type of things that you like to learn or need to learn. So maybe you have some things that you need to learn for work at the moment. Perhaps you could start to apply this to those situations, to those challenges, to those experiences that you're having. So the first point is we know that when we learn things, our brain will find it easier if we can link it and align it to things that we already understand. The brain likes shortcuts, and it really likes it when it can make a connection between things. That's what assumptions are all about. We make assumptions because the brain likes to connect what it knows with something that maybe it doesn't know. We might see a person we've never met before. We make an assumption about them because our brain needs to fill in the gaps. So if we can utilize that to our advantage when we are learning, so that we can build on what we already have in our brain, in our memory, in our knowledge and experience, rather than starting from scratch. So wherever we can, we try to link our learning to things we already know, have, or do, because that will help it to stick much more easily. Me using the example of flat pack furniture, that is a way of attaching any new learning that you get today to something that's probably very familiar to most of us. So there's some questions you can ask yourself there. What do I already know about this? So how do I already engage in this information or in this task or in this new area or new topic? What do I already understand here that I can build on? Because once you ask yourself that, you are telling the brain, I've got something to build on. I need to attach this bit of information to the bit that I already have. And that's a really important way to start learning. If we can always start our learning with what do I already know and what are the gaps that I don't know so that I can fill those gaps. That has the double benefit of you understanding where you really need to focus your attention to fill in the gaps. So in that bookcase example, I know what it looks like. I know that's the top and that's the bottom. But what I don't know is how I'm going to attach the side to the back, for example. And that's the bit that I can focus on. The other way we can build is to relate our learning to real work situations. Now, if you're going to a workshop or if you are doing an e-learning or maybe you're looking at a video, sometimes there'll be quite generic examples, especially if you're in a mixed group, people from all different organizations. But whenever they ask you to reflect, whenever they ask you to do an activity or an exercise, making sure you really think about how this relates directly to your day-to-day work is a great way of helping to build on those neural pathways in your brain to help the meaning and the information to stick. If you're on a team day where everyone in the session is all from the same organization, then hopefully you'll be using case studies, examples, and exercises that will be very specific to you. So you'll be able to do that almost without trying. But if that's not the case, giving yourself the opportunity to think, how can I use this? If I had to use this tomorrow in my work, how would I do that? So that's build. Take what you've already got, take what you already know and understand, and build on it so that your brain has to do less work, less effort to get to the end result. The next one is retrieve. Retrieve is all about recall and bringing the information back so that we can strengthen the neural pathways. We've started to build the neural pathways, and I don't really want to go into all of the neuroscience about it because you don't need to know that. But what we're trying to do is to understand how we can strengthen those neural pathways in our brain that allows us to call back the information quickly, easily, and effectively. So one of the things that, is really helpful with this is spacing of learning. So one and done doesn't work. If you're going on a workshop, do you get any follow-up? Do you get any pre-work? Do you have opportunity to reflect on it? Perhaps maybe you have a conversation with your line manager around it a few days later. There's lots of ways that we can use this idea of retrieval and recall to help us to strengthen the ability to remember the key points and the key information. We know that we lose an awful lot of what we learn in a very short space of time. There's a forgetting curve, and we might not even remember much of what we've learned on the day by the end of the workshop. And that's normal and that's human because we can only take in so much information. So identifying first and foremost, what were the key points for you in that learning opportunity, and making sure you plan to retrieve those at regular intervals. So for example, I'm really hoping that if you only take one thing away from today, you'll remember build, retrieve, apply. So I'm going to give you plenty of opportunities to think about how you build, retrieve, apply. And at the end, I want you to remember build, retrieve, apply. And then afterwards, I would like you to reflect back on build, retrieve, apply. And that will help to strengthen that in the brain over time. Look at it again tomorrow, look at it again next week. That's what we mean by spacing, bringing it back to mind, revisiting your notes, talking to somebody about it, looking over the slides, All of that will help you to strengthen those connections within your brain. If you think of it a little bit like your laptop, when you open your laptop and you open up a document that you haven't opened for a very long time, or maybe you've never opened it before, it's a new document on your shared drive or on OneDrive or on Google Drive, whatever you use, and it's the first time you've opened it, there might be a slight delay with it all loading because it's the first time. But if you open it again 2 hours later, it'll load almost automatically because it's already imprinted in recent sort of memory on the computer. It's very similar to how our brains work with retrieving information. So what we want to do is to provide opportunities for our brain to remember what we've covered, the important points very soon after, and then again at intervals across the following weeks, months. So some questions you can ask yourselves. What are the 3 things I want to remember at the end of a learning experience? And then write those down, come back to them. Think about how you're going to bring those back to life for yourself. And then 2 key ways that can be really, really helpful in retrieval. Writing things down, and we do tend to find that physically writing down is more impactful and helps with memory better than typing. And then talking to someone. So sharing what you've learned with the team, talking to your manager in your next one-to-one about what you've learned and how you're applying it, talking to your loved one when you get home. I went on this training today and we learned this and this. We learned build, retrieve, apply. That will all help to solidify the learning in your own mind. And then finally, apply. So apply is all about transfer of the learning into your day-to-day life. And we know that having a practical way to utilize your learning helps to strengthen those pathways even further. When we say, I am going to use this learning in this way, we set a subconscious task for ourselves, a commitment to ourselves to put that into practice. So that's why at the end of a lot of workshops or e-learnings, you might be asked, what will you do with this information? What are you going to go away and put into practice over the next 2 days, week, month? Because that is a way that you can commit to yourself and you can help that learning to be solidified. So some nice questions you can ask yourself here is, how could I experiment with this? What's one small thing that I could do to put this learning into practice tomorrow? Where could I bring this to my day-to-day work? How could we benefit from this in my team? And then to commit to trying one thing within the first 2 days after the learning experience has happened to help that neural pathway to be strengthened and replenished. So those are our top 3 tips for hacking your brain. So build on what you already know, retrieve regularly, often, and in different ways, and apply the learning in your day-to-day work as much and as quickly as you possibly can. I just wanted to share one final thing with you before we start to wrap things up. So at Lead Action, we have been designing learning for around 20 years, and the ideas around learning and learning design have definitely evolved over time. Certainly when I started my career, we didn't really talk about learning transfer all that much. We certainly didn't talk about learning neuroscience. But more and more, the more we're learning about learning, the more we learn about the brain and how we remember and recall and apply things, the more effective our design can be to help maximize that as much as possible. So this is a slide for anyone who's watching who is responsible for designing learning, and a few things for you to think about. I'm not going to go through every principle, but these are the 8 principles that we've developed that take learning science into account, and we're enhancing these all the time as we learn new things, as we get to know brains better. We develop these as we go along, but these are the 8 that we use whenever we're designing any type of learning. So that might be e-learning, it might be workshops and programs, it might be something like our quick guides, our interactive manuals. Whatever we design, we use these 8 principles. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of them. So the first one is that learning should be accessible and inclusive by design. Now, there's an element of we do learn by a small amount of discomfort. So we don't learn as much when we're very comfortable and we're sort of in our stride or in, doing things that we're really comfortable with. So we do need to be stretched. But there's a difference between being stretched and being truly uncomfortable, as in, I can't access this learning properly because it is not made to be accessible for me or for others. And so What we want to do is make sure all learning is inclusive and accessible from day one by design, not adaptable necessarily. It's already inclusive from day one. So making sure that anyone can access that learning, can build on that learning, regardless of how they learn, or maybe what accommodations they might need if they have a screen reader, if they require subtitles. Those should be built in from day one. And so it's all about thinking about how we can make learning as inclusive and accessible as possible. And the other one I just really quickly wanted to talk about is that learning is influenced by how we feel. So not just how we feel going in, because that is important. If we want to learn, we need to have the headspace. We need to have the emotional capability to be able to engage in learning. It's very hard to learn when you're distracted by very pressing things or feeling very stressed, feeling very worried about things. But we also know that as human beings, we learn with emotion. So when we are designing learning, it's all thinking about tapping into people's experiences and therefore the emotions that go along with those experiences. So wherever we can, it's thinking about how can we link this to what people think, do, and really importantly, feel. I won't go through the others because we are short on time, but I just wanted to share those with you as something that we really need to be thinking about more in the L&D community to make sure that our learning is available to people to learn. And we're creating a partnership where we provide the learning in a way that is accessible, but then the learner is able to really engage in it to the best of their ability. So to finish this off, I'd like us to think about what we have experienced today. And as I've already said, how we implement things, how we apply the learning is key to that lasting change and retention of learning. So I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes to think about the insights that you've picked up. What were the 3 things that you would like to remember from the session, the last half an hour? What are the top 3 things you would like to take away from today? Let's think about one key action that you can take to put your learning into practice. So what's one thing you could do to move towards understanding better ways or experiencing better ways to learn? Perfect week to do this, Learning at Work week. Hopefully you've got lots of opportunities to learn over the week. What will you do to help to make sure that that learning sticks? When you know what you're going to do, think about any barriers that you might face realistically and how you might overcome them. So you might say, well, that's all well and good, Nat, but I haven't got time to go away and write in my journal about the learning that I've undertaken. I haven't got time to go and have a conversation. What do you have time for? Do you have time to write something in the Teams channel, went on a webinar, and I learned this? 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Do you have time for that? You might say one of your other barriers is I don't know where to start. Well, I've given you some options for starting. So when you get the slides, or you can look back on the recording and you can use one of those questions as a starting point. So help yourself to plan and overcome those barriers. Set a commitment. And one way we like to do that, you can do this in lots of different ways. Some people use postcards. You post back to yourself. We like this because it's nice and easy. Write down what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how you're going to overcome the barriers, and email it to yourself with a delayed delivery date of 7 days. So set a delayed delivery date for next Monday. And what will happen then is it'll come into your inbox next Monday, and then you can reflect on whether you have achieved the action that you set out to achieve. Just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us today, or if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording. We hope it was useful. We'd love to stay in contact. So there's a couple of QR codes on the screen there. If you're not already, please do follow us on LinkedIn. We're very active on social media. The one on the right-hand side is a link to our community, and you can get our newsletter and useful resources and updates on things like Learning at Work. We never spam anyone. So if you are interested in learning more or keeping in touch, please use that right-hand QR code to join our community. Just leaves me to say, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you all very much for joining us. I hope you enjoy Learning at Work week as much as I know we will, and do stay in touch. We'd love to hear how you get on with some actions from today. Thank you so much.